Hey guys, it's Layla from Ignite, and in today's video I'll be addressing a key theme from Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. If you are studying the HSC and you'd love extra resources to facilitate your ability to study these texts, check out our website www.ignitehsc.com.au. We've got loads of resources, exemplar essays, analysis on all your key texts. I guarantee you won't regret checking it out. But for now, let's get into today's content. So my aim for today's video is to frame for you a central concern that takes place in Mrs. Dalloway. Of course, this study is part of the comparative textual conversations between Virginia Woolf and Stephen Daldry, but in this video I will limit my analysis to Mrs. Dalloway, and I will foreground some connections that you could draw to how these ideas are explored in the hours. So I'll frame that central concern, and then what I will do is give you examples from Mrs. Dalloway, actual quotes that you could use to substantiate a paragraph based on any of these ideas, and analysis as well. So after the video, you'll be well equipped to start drafting some and prepping some paragraphs based on Mrs. Dalloway, and to give you analysis to really kind of get you through that process. So let's take a look at the central concern for today. In this video, I'll be focusing on the notion of mortality. Now, this omnipresence of death and mortality is obviously indebted to Virginia Woolf's context. We had, of course, the First World War from 1914 to 1919, and that war, when it outbroke, was expected to be finished before the end of 1914. But of course, it dragged on for another 5 years, and the loss of life and the corruption of the innocence of young men full of bravado going to war had long-lasting impacts, and those impacts are definitely reflected through characters such as Septimus Warren Smith, who has constant thoughts of mortality running through his mind. Now, Septimus and his obsession with mortality and his, trauma that he's experienced through war serves as a direct oppositional force to the sense of futility that Mrs. Dalloway experiences. Her existence is somewhat reduced to her role as this perfect hostess. She feels confined within her domestic role, and the gendered expectations of her time serve to, enhance her sense of meaninglessness in her existence. That sense of meaninglessness is also reflected in the character of Septimus. Having been to war, witnessing the death of his close friend Evans, seeing the abundance of mortality and its inevitability, has in turn raised a sense of existentialism, and the inability to overcome the presence of death also imbues his existence with a sense of meaninglessness. Because of course he is plagued by the question, if death is so imminent, what is the point of survival? So the quotes that I bring up explore these notions of mortality in specific relation to Septimus, but we do also know that Mrs. Dalloway, being aware of his ultimate suicide, kind of awakens her from the limitations and the imprisonment of her domestic existence. When we look at the hours, we know that Septimus's death is then channeled through Mrs. Dalloway's good friend Richard, and he ultimately commits suicide as well at the end of the text. He frees himself from the entrapment of his mental health issues. He is what we would call a modern day embodiment of Septimus. He deals with issues imbued on him by his sexuality and his masculinity. Of course, the emasculated nature of Septimus in the text is in some ways reflected through the masculine presence of Richard and Mrs. Dalloway, in the hours. So there are lots of connections there that can be drawn, but I will remain focused and streamlined on mortality as is represented in Mrs. Dalloway. So let's take a look at a bit of evidence which backs up this as a concern within the text. We have the narrative voice, the third person narrator, being limited to the perspective of Septimus here, focalizing his thoughts. He felt nothing. Nothing could rouse him. Retzier put him to bed that he did not feel. So we've got the repetition of nothing, the negatives there. And we've got this high modality, nothing could rouse him. This sense that Septimus has lost all, sexual revival. His libido, his libidinal investment is dwindling. And he could not feel. So this sense of impotence is very kind of symbolically alluding to a sense of emasculation of man within this context. There is this sense that men came back from war almost castrated in a symbolic sense because they were removed of all their masculinity. They were traumatized by war experience. And the impotence of Septimus here, his inability to respond to his wife, is a classic example of post-trauma coming out of war experience. So let's take a look now at how you would actually frame all of of this analysis that I've mentioned here in an actual body paragraph. So here's an example of how you could actually frame this bit of evidence if you were analysing it in an essay. Repetition of nothing within Woolf's short and repetitive syntax dramatises the futility and Retzia's attempt to shake Septimus into feeling. He is numb. There is a sense of meaninglessness to his existence because he has been exposed to such a great extent of mortality. Implied within this analysis is Retzia's attempt to sexually arouse Septimus. Woolf here exposes the futility of libidinal investment when one has been exposed to such trauma, such as what Septimus has seen through war experience. The sexual impotence of Septimus speaks to the emasculation of man as he has been forced to submit to a duty to his country and go to war. Okay, let's now take a look at how he then converts that notion of mortality into a sense of freedom for himself as he turns to suicide to escape from this confinement that has been introduced to him by mortality. So the quote reads, "Death was defiance. Death was an attempt to communicate people feeling the impossibility of reaching the center which mystically evaded them. Closeness drew apart, rapture faded, one was alone." So you've got this repetition of the dental sounds, dental through the D. Death was defiance. Death was an attempt. The repetition of death at the beginning of the clauses here is called anaphora. There's an anaphoric utterance of death to shake the reader into being aware of its, presence in the mind of Septimus. It was an attempt to communicate people feeling the impossibility of reaching the centre which mystically evaded them. And this is exactly what Mrs. Dalloway experiences, right? She's experiencing this centre of her existence as evading because she feels a sense of futility in her existence. And Septimus's death awakens her from that centre of her which seems to be dwindling away. Closeness drew apart, rapture faded, one was alone. And he's able to, embrace that sense of solitude and escapism through his own death. So let's take a look at how these notions of mortality could be explained in a paragraph. The metaphors used to define death mark the individual's gradual movement towards their revelation of that which feeds the innate thirst for purpose. And that's what both Mrs. Dalloway and Septimus are plagued by, a sense of purposelessness in their existence. That's what connects these characters. The death of Septimus serves to render salient the evading centre, the absence of soul, the manifest alienation. We become aware of these characteristics of our existence when confronted with death, because how can one find meaning in their existence when they have been exposed to such manifest examples of death, such as was the case through the war? As such, Septimus's suicide serves as an awakening to Mrs. Dalloway's self-indulged conflict. She is self-indulged. She is plagued by her existence in a sense of being a perfect hostess, and the awareness, the recognition of Septimus's death shakes her from that self-obsession, releasing her from the domestic, societal and internalized restrictions with which she has restrained herself. So we can see here multiple ways through which you can analyse this notion of mortality in the text. It is clearly channeled through the character of Septimus, but of course Mrs. Dalloway is aware of his own mortality, and that, wakes her from the futility of her role as the hostess. There is mortality which then carries through in the hours. We can think about Richard's death and the impact it has on Clarissa's character in her 21st century context, but I'm merely foregrounding the connections here, and you can build on them throughout your essay. But I hope you guys have found that really useful. I hope you've got a kickstart now on drafting up those paragraphs. I highly encourage you to get them done now, well in advance of your trials or your HSC, so you've got good exemplar material to be working with. If you want more of this analysis, if you want to see how you would draw those connections to the hours, check out our resources. We've got full exemplar essays in there for you to facilitate your ability to navigate writing the essay. Check it out at the website I mentioned at the beginning of the clip. But for now, guys, if you like the content, like and subscribe to our channel. Leave any questions in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I really do look forward to seeing you in the next video. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right, guys. Thanks for watching, and please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehse.com.au, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.